Let me speak with you a bit about home-built wooden boat construction. I'd like to get into some of the details so you understand it better. My name is Jeff Spira, and I've been around boats all my life. I've been designing and building boats since my teenage years, and since the mid-1990s I've been selling my boat plans on the internet. This seminar is about boat construction. I'm going to go into the details of the various different types of boat construction, starting from the old traditional designs and going into some of the more advanced wooden boat designs. So you'll get a better idea of how the whole thing works. The basic traditional boat design is called carvel planked. This design has been around for hundreds of years. It included big wooden ships and smaller boats even being built today. It's the most common type you'll find in some of the more traditional boat designs that you might buy on the internet. The basic traditional boat design is called carvel planked. This design has been around for hundreds of years. It included big wooden ships and smaller boats even being built today. It's the most common type you'll find in some of the more traditional boat designs that you might buy. Now, along with the lines drawing comes what is called a table of offsets. And this is a table of numbers that are basically dimensions on where those lines in the lines drawing actually occur in real life. So this table was used in the more traditional designs. It's not necessarily used today, and I'll get into that in more detail later, but it will describe how to go about drawing the lines of the boat full-sized, and that's called lofting. Here's what lofting actually looks like. The numbers or dimensions taken off the table of offsets are laying out on a long flat place where you can identify them, and then a batten is used, which is basically a piece of wood held in place with weights to draw the lines of the boat. The lines need to be what's termed fair, that is, no kinks in them, but a nice smooth curve. And the batten used held in place with weights ensure that those curves are fair. From the lofted lines of the boat, the actual shapes of the frames can be determined. In this example, you see a picture of some S-shaped frames, which is kind of common on some larger sailboats. But the table of offsets will actually describe these shapes, so you're able to determine what shape to bend these. Now, these S-shaped frames can't be simply bent into place. The wood is usually too stiff. So the wood needs to be treated so that it can be bent, and this is typically done by steaming it. A box is built that you can put the frame inside of and then fill the box with steam, and the frame will get much easier to bend, much more flexible. Once the frames have been steamed, they need to be bent into shape. Here's an example of a jig that will hold the frame in shape until the steam effects go away. The frame cools off and dries up a bit, and then the steam bent frame will hold that new curved shape. Once these steam bent frames are then assembled in a fixture of sorts to ensure they're all in the appropriate location. And this forms the basic hull shape of the boat. Now, attached to these frames are longitudinal carvel planks. They're longitudinal elements. You can see them in place here. Each plank is held in place with fasteners to each frame. Now, between each of these carvel planks is a little space. In fact, it should be there because the plank is going to swell after it gets immersed in water. But that little gap needs to be filled, and in this case it's being filled with what is called caulking. Now caulking is typically cotton. In this case that's a piece of cotton coughing. It's like a string that gets pounded in there. For wider planks and bigger spaces they use what's called oakum. It's carved from oak. It's kind of like Brillo pad being made from stainless steel, but in this case it's made from oak lumber, and it's twisted into a rough sort of cable or string, and that is pounded using special caulking mallet and caulking iron into the gap between each of the planks. There's another type of hull that I'd like to talk about here. It's built in the same way as Carvel planks, but it's called lapstrake. And as you can see, it forms this nice stepped side. It's very attractive in a lot of boats. Everybody wishes they had a beautiful lapstrake boat like this. Well, let me show you how that's made as well. Here's an example of lapstrake construction. The frames are the same as in a Carvel planked hull. They're steam bent and curved. But the planks are a bit different. They're overlap each other, as you can see here. Instead of just being attached to the frames, the lapstrakes are also attached to each other. You can see the row of fasteners between each lapstrake hull. Typically these are copper rivets. It's a device that looks like a nail that gets pushed through the outside, and then on the inside a washer's put over it, and the head of the rivet is pounded over and mushroomed so that it holds close with the washer, and it kind of binds the two pieces together. It's a lot of work. It usually takes two people to do, but it results in these beautiful hulls. There's another method I'd like to discuss with you. I call it the multi-ply method. You may have heard the term cold forming or double diagonal plywood, or there's other terminology for it. But what it allows is for you to have steam bent frames with the appropriate curves. You notice a lot of flare on this hull, but allow it to be covered with wood and build up the wood structure around it using the same methods as you might using a Carvel planked boat. It's better than Carvel planking in a lot of ways because you don't have to worry about the gaps and the caulking. So it's a good method, and it's being used quite a bit in many boats built for or designed for home builders. Let's now move on to plywood boat building. Unfortunately, when you mention plywood boats, a lot of people think of boats like this. Very simple box-like construction, very simplified boats that maybe aren't very practical. The true story of plywood boats, though, is that there are many sophisticated designs that can be built in plywood. It just takes a knowledge of how plywood reacts and how to design the various frames and sections by the designer to create some very elegant looking plywood boat shapes. This is one of my plywood boat shapes. It's called the Hatteras. It's a 19-footer, and it kind of shows that these boats can be fairly sophisticated looking. They don't need to be a simple box to be made out of plywood for the home builder. Here you can see a plywood boat going together. As you can tell, the elements that go into it are pretty simple and straightforward, and it goes together quickly without a lot of fasteners and without a lot of trouble. So let me get into the structural engineering of this, and so I can explain to you how this all works. As some of you may know, I'm a mechanical engineer. And in my day gig, I find myself around all sorts of structural problems. I've designed equipment for big shipyards and offshore drilling rigs, for big structures, as well as aircraft and missile parts, automotive parts, and things like that. So I design my hulls a little bit differently than most boat designers do, and I'll explain to you why. The classic way to design a vehicle of any kind is to start with a big sturdy frame. This is a 1950s Chevrolet frame, and at that time many things were built this way, and in this case the body and the motor and the various parts fit onto this frame, and the frame ties the whole thing together. Aircraft also were built on frames. In the old days, they'd use a wooden or steel tube fuselage and construct the airplane surfaces and wings and things and attach them to this fuselage assembly built this way. Now here's an example of a modern home-built airplane, and you can see that it uses a welded steel frame as well. Modern vehicles don't use these big sturdy frames though. Here's a modern car, and you can see it uses a unibody. That's an assembly of panels that kind of form the shape of the body anyway, and they're welded together into a unitized structure. And this serves as the main body of the car, the main frame, without actually having a frame. Aircraft are built this way as well. Here's a modern airplane, and you can see that the framing elements and the actual skin of the plane are attached together. Previously they were riveted, but today they're mostly bonded into a unibody structure as well. It's called monocoque construction. Boats are built this way as well. Here's a modern fiberglass boat coming out of its mold. It's a unitized structure as well. Now it doesn't make it easy for the home builder to do something like this, because first you got to have the right design that has strength in the right locations, and secondly you have to build a mold in order to build the boat out of it. So it doesn't make it very conducive for the guy wanting to build a boat in his garage to use this modern unitized boat building method. If you're able to take this plywood boat design though and bond each of the structures together, you can create a modern unitized structure using familiar elements that you can buy at the local hardware store and create such a design. And that's what I've done with my boat designs. Now these old-fashioned boats that use separate frames and planking elements, they're said to have 1,000 fasteners per inch of hull length. So if this is a 20-foot boat, that's 288 inches. That'd be 288,000 fasteners going into this boat. It's really a collection of parts all moving along the water together, being held together by fasteners. My hull design, that's similar to the last picture, doesn't actually need fasteners. You could arrange a way to hold the hull together while the epoxy cured, or the glue holding the various pieces together, and you wouldn't even need fasteners at all. In fact, if you use fasteners, you could actually remove them and fill the holes if you wished, and have no fasteners in the completed hull. It's all bonded together into a unitized structure. Let's examine this construction method in a little more depth. Here's a frame from one of my designs, and as you can see, it's made of standard milled lumber, cut into certain lengths and arranged in certain angles. It doesn't require any cutting or forming or shaping to make it the appropriate shape. When a V-bottom is needed, you can see that the framing is very similar, except it has a V-bottom made of straight elements of lumber. These frames are then arranged on a beam, which I call a strongback jig, and then a section of lumber called the keelson is used to tie them all together. Where the boat sides meet the boat bottom, a cutout is made, and a longitudinal element called a chine log is added. This goes all the way from the stem to the transom. And further up the sides, which is really the bottom in this boat, you see another longitudinal element called a shear clamp, also from the stem all the way to the transom. After the glue holding these parts together cures, you can fair the boat. And by that I mean tapering the outside edges of the elements so that they'll meet the plywood covering more easily. In this example, I'm fairing the frames of the very first Ozark fisherman hull using a block plane. Very simple to do. Once the glue dries, the assembly that you're working on is pretty stiff, and you can use it as a pattern to cut out the plywood planking that goes over top of it. Here, the builder has applied the plywood to the sides of the boat, glued and screwed it in place, and getting ready to apply the plywood to the bottom. As you approach the bow in V-bottom boats, the plywood doesn't twist very well to accommodate the amount of twist in the hull. In this case, you can cut the ply into smaller chunks and kind of fit it together up there. It'll then be able to be sanded smooth and create that nice V entry. Now, I also recommend that my hulls be covered with fiberglass. Typically, this is 2 layers of 6-ounce cloth. This is what the boat hull looks like after it's covered with 2 layers. You can actually see right through it down to the wood. Most of the boats, after they're covered with fiberglass, are painted. Since they're already upside down, it's pretty easy to get to the hull at this stage. Once the hull is painted, invite your friends over and flip the boat over. Now the boat is right side up and you can start working on the inside. I get a lot of questions about, can we do this, can we do that, what kind of decking? I don't typically design the insides of boats. I design the hull structure. Because everyone wants something different in the inside, I kind of avoid it. You can add various types of decking, superstructure, things like that as you need it at this time. Now, some people elect to use a thwart seat, which is a side-to-side bench to sit on. That's a very common use in some of these hulls. Now, a lot of builders like to use a center console. This is particularly true for those of us that like fishing. Here's one with a seat behind it for a leaning post or seat to be operated while standing up or sitting down. On some of my larger boats, I offer a cabin structure. This is a smaller boat though, and the builder here decided to put a small camping type cabin on his. This builder decided he needed a larger cabin. This is a full pilot house and below decks on a 19-foot boat. It also has an air conditioner in the front there. This boat's built in Louisiana, where they get lots of hot, sticky weather, so I can expect that air conditioner would be a blessing in many times of the year. Another type of boat construction you should be familiar with is called stitch and glue. Now, this uses plywood panels that are bonded to each other on the edges, along with a stiffening joint and typically some fiberglass that holds them together and makes them into a simple unitized structure. Here's all the hull elements assembled together into one of my ultralight boats called the Mission Bay skiff. The Mission Bay skiff hull elements are then bonded together along the edges. I think you can see it on the inside here to form this unitized structure. And once those elements are cured, this is what the hull looks like in the water. after it's been bonded together like that. Very simple construction. Most of my stitch and glue boats are fairly small boats. I call them my ultralight series. But I also have some larger ones. This is the 16-foot version of the V-bottom hulls. They come in 16 feet, 18 feet, and 20 feet. Now, if you're not sure you're ready to start building a boat, may I suggest that you start by giving a kayak a try. For a couple $100 and a few weekends of work, you can put together a nice little kayak like this one. The Huntington Harbor kayak that you see here in the previous slide, the plans are absolutely free. You can download them here. It's a pretty stable boat too. Here you can see a builder standing up in his. These kayaks will hold quite a bit of weight too. Here's two people, two adults in one of the Huntington Harbors that they built themselves. A lot of people like these kayaks for fishing as well. They have a lot of room in them. They're quite stable. You can even take them out in the ocean and catch bigger fish if you wish. Here's what the download looks like for the Huntington Harbor Sea Kayak. It's got all the instructions written in it as well as the drawings to how to build the parts. Quite a simple project, and it should be everyone's first try at building a boat. Stop by my website and have a look at the many different designs I have available for the home builder. The boats are organized into different categories, whether it's an offshore power dory or a panga or whatever. And under each category I have the different sizes of boats available. There's over 100 on the website, so drop by and take a look. Well, I could go on forever about boat design and construction, but I figure that should do it for this seminar as of now. If you'd like to chat with me further, feel free to get a hold of me. You can get a hold of me on my Facebook page, or best bet is to send me an email. I have published my office phone number, but it's tough to catch me there as I've got a day gig as well as my boat design thing, and it's very difficult to catch me. So if you'd like to speak with me on the phone, I'll be happy to. Just send me an email and we'll arrange a time, and I'll give a chance to give you a call and we'll chat. Other than that, keep having fun and keep building boats, and hope this helps.